Hey, everybody, waitingfornextyear.com podcast. I'm your host, Craig Lindell, and we are talking about the Browns for 30 straight minutes. No other topics. The Cleveland Browns. That's all we're talking about. Nobody better, maybe nobody better to talk about that subject with than Dan Labbe of Cleveland.com. It's been fun to watch Dan rise the ranks. You know, when I first met Dan, he was kind of a digital first producer maybe at Cleveland.com. I don't even know. But now to see him all the way up to kind of a headline, not headline, but a major Browns reporter in Cleveland, and the fact that we can call him a friend at Waiting for Next Year is really cool. So he spent about a half hour talking about everything from Terrelle Pryor and Josh Gordon to the Haslam's voting for the Raiders to move from Oakland to Vegas. So it was a really fun conversation, and it's brought to you by Patreon. It's brought to you by the people who listen to this podcast, patreon.com/WFNY. That's all I'm going to say. Short and sweet. Even Dave Sterling could skip this part. Here's Dan Labbe.
Waiting for next year. Waiting for next year.
On the other end of the line, Cleveland Browns reporter Dan Labbe. How's it going?
Hey, Craig. How are you?
I'm doing great. I think the last time we talked was right when you got the Browns gig.
Yeah, it might have been. I can't remember. But yeah, I think it was probably around that time. So it's been a little while.
Yeah. So how long has it been? We were talking about the news cycle before we turned on the microphones here, but like they're years and then they're Browns years.
Yeah, exactly. Let's see. I think I've been on the Browns team for I think I'm going into year 4. And then it was I guess it was right before training camp that I moved up after Tom Reed left. I was kind of unofficially in his role and then officially took over his role, I think, right before training camp last season.
Well, and that's a good place to start because this is something that I've been thinking a lot about, especially as, you know, I talk about the Browns on the podcast and I write about them on Waiting for Next Year. It's how much do you think about kind of the meta strategy of covering the Browns, and how much do you just kind of let it come to you?
I do a little bit of both because there's so much that can happen on a given day, and then honestly there's days where you're out there all day and nothing really happens, so you kind of go in with an idea of, okay, this is what I'm thinking about, this is what I see people are talking about, kind of what they want to know, maybe what they want to read, but at the same time, you know, especially when you've got open locker room during the season, sometimes you can stumble into something interesting, or you talk to a guy that has a good story that maybe you didn't realize had a good story. So it's a little bit of both. I think you've got to come in with an idea of what you want to do, but then you've got to be open to kind of leave that idea behind and just sort of chase something else.
Yeah, because it's hard. You can't really have a 3-year strategy with the Browns, can you?
No, exactly. And, you know, you try. Obviously, with this regime, there's a clear storyline right now. There's a clear, you know, they have a plan. They're trying to execute that plan. It's still, you know, we don't know if it's going to work yet or not. So that's kind of the big picture. What is this plan? What do they need to do to make it work? But at the same time, you know, you just never know what's going to happen. If they go 3-13 again, you know, is Jimmy Haslam going to have an itchy trigger finger?
Yeah, it's hard to imagine some scenario where they win fewer. I hate when they, how many games do they have to win in order for jobs? Nobody knows because, you know, a certain 5-win season might look different than a certain 3-win season, where a 3-win season could look better than a 5-win season, just depending on how it goes. But this idea that and it's funny to watch these guys operate because they are operating in such a manner that you would think that they do have, or they at least have the feeling of job security. Yeah,
and you know, last year was interesting. I mean, you kind of make a good point about, you know, not all seasons are created equal. Essentially, like when the last year of Mike Pettin was miserable, and they won more games that year than they did last year when they went 1-15, but you're in that locker room and you're around those guys, and it was a completely different vibe and just a completely different feel around that team. Obviously, it was a younger team too, but you know, there was a sense that, look, nothing's going to change, even though most of the year they were winless. So it was just a different vibe and a different feel, and right now it does feel like this group is operating like a group that feels comfortable, that they're going to have more time, even if this year doesn't quite go the way they want it to.
So one of the things that everybody is talking about this time of year, and Zach Jackson noted it, I noted it, it's the annual, I'm sure you've noted it as well, it's the annual Josh Gordon conversation.
Oh my gosh.
But I think it is interesting where not all seasons are created equal, not all distractions are created equally either. And now that you've spent a good amount of time in the locker room talking to those guys, I just get the sense that Josh Gordon doesn't present the same exact kind of distraction as maybe Johnny Manziel or some of the other guys that they've run out of here.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I don't, he's not Johnny Manziel, and he's not. I think last year was a strange year because he was there and guys were getting asked about him. But honestly, once that suspension started, once preseason was over, and then of course he checks into rehab right before he was supposed to come back, it was almost like he didn't exist. We weren't allowed to talk to him. There weren't a lot of questions about him, just sort of every now and again, what do you think this offense could look like when he comes back? And it was sort of in the back of everyone's minds, but I don't think Josh Gordon is this guy that is just this big presence in that locker room. He's just kind of a guy who's there. I think he's a guy that if they wanted to take a chance with him and kind of see what they could do with him, which I don't know that they should do, but if they wanted to do that, I don't think it would be that big of a distraction. It wouldn't throw everything off the rails. It's very different than maybe some other cases.
Well, and some of it's the position he plays too, I think, because not all wide receivers are mercenaries, but many mercenaries are wide receivers, if that makes a lot of sense. And so you can kind of do that and just have a guy who's really talented, but maybe not like a total team guy at that position.
Yeah, and you do have to be a little bit careful because if you go back to 2014 when they were playing so well and everybody was talking about, okay, when Josh Gordon comes back, this team's going to make their playoff push, and it all kind of fell apart. It was a guy who really didn't seem to know what he was supposed to do, really didn't put out optimal effort. Those are things that concern you, and those are things that you don't want. So if they look at the situation and say, okay, maybe he's not a distraction in the locker room, but on the field, he's not going to run the right routes. He's not going to do what we need him to do if he's not 100% happy with his situation, then they do need to move on from him. But if they believe that he can be a better citizen when it comes to on the field and doing what he's supposed to do on the field, there is still a lot of talent there. And of course, there's the risk that you could have him for half a season and then he's gone. So they have to be willing to put up with that risk as well, because it'll always be in the back of your mind with Josh Gordon. Even if he puts in 3 years without a problem, it's going to be in the back of your mind that the other shoe's going to drop.
It was really interesting to hear Sashi Brown say that they're not in a spot with that position on the roster that they can just turn away somebody like Josh Gordon and say no way.
Yeah, and that's the problem. They don't have the talent at that position. The draft picks from last year really didn't work out. And not so much Corey Coleman. The jury is obviously still out on all these guys, but especially Corey Coleman. At least he produced a little bit. But the other guys, the other three receivers they drafted last year didn't do anything. And had they maybe gotten something out of those guys, you could be a little more comfortable just writing off Josh Gordon. And I'm not convinced that they still aren't going to just write off Josh Gordon. But the fact that those guys didn't do much and they still need help at that position, they lost Terrelle Pryor. I get that. Again, though, Sashi Brown says a lot of things, and then the other thing kind of happens sometimes. Well,
and the Terrelle Pryor thing was kind of interesting. Like, in the end, I don't think you always risk if you overstate the loss of Terrelle Pryor, you also risk overstating how good a player he was, and he was unfinished. He was still rough around the edges and needed work. So but at the same time, Sashi Brown saying that they're not at a position with that position on the roster, it's like, well, you had one. Couldn't you have kept him and Kenny Britt?
Yeah, you had one in Terrelle Pryor, not just had one in Terrelle Pryor, but had a guy that put in the work, made a transition that was completely unlike anything we've really seen in the modern NFL. Obviously, he had some issues as far as some things he said, implied some things about Robert Griffin III here and there. But still, for the most part, a pretty good teammate, did his job, put in the work, had a fantastic season with almost no help around him because Corey Coleman was hurt for so long. And again, your number 2 receiver at that point was Andrew Hawkins. You can't teach that kind of size. You can't teach that kind of athleticism. And unlike Josh Gordon, he was there for you every single week, even playing through that finger injury. I mean, he couldn't even bend that finger in the Buffalo game. He had to have a trainer unbend his middle finger so he could continue to play in that Buffalo game, and he still finished out the season. So I'm not a fan of them losing Terrelle Pryor. I kind of see how the situation played out, but it is strange they would say that about a guy like Josh Gordon, but then kind of be a little flippant about Terrelle Pryor when they were asked about that before free agency opened.
Well, and it is an analytical crew. I wonder how much they look at his stats, and I've wondered this too, and I don't know how to come to an answer as to whether it's the case, but like at a certain point, he didn't have any help, but there was also nobody else there available to catch any passes, and so I wonder like how much of it is the Ricky Davis effect. Like, you know, an NBA team's going to score between 80 and 90 points a night, and somebody's got to fill it up.
Yeah, I think that's fair to look at it like that, but at the same time, I just think, again, you look at his size. This is a guy who's built like a tight end. And I don't think they list him at his actual height. I think they list him at 6'4". But if you stand next to this guy, I don't know if he's 6'4". I think he's a little bigger than 6'4". He looks like a tight end. He plays like a wide receiver. Like you said, I still think he's an unfinished product. I still think there's room for him to grow. And I think he's a guy you can trust to put in the work because, again, this was such an unconventional transition, and he was so committed to it. He wanted to do it. Again, he was there for you every single week, and I don't think you can understate how important that was, that he answered the bell 16 times this season.
Including
that's an important thing.
running the Wildcat.
Yeah, I mean, he almost carried you to a win against Miami. Had Cody Parkey maybe been signed 5 days before that game instead of the day before that game, you win that game in Miami. And a lot of that was because of Terrelle Pryor.
Man, so crazy. So crazy. So one of the other things that came out this week, and maybe it's just talk, but they're talking about the mention of kind of redoing the uniforms. And we could talk about it the way everybody else has been talking about it, or we could just say, hey, is this like them undoing absolutely everything that Alec Scheiner did?
It sure feels like it, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, the whole uniform thing was just such a weird thing. Every year it comes up on that Time Hop app for me, and I think, what were we doing covering that thing like we were? And I mean, it was this big event at the convention center, and they had just done the new orange as well. It was just such a weird situation, and I feel like they learned a lot from that. And I don't know if they're going to go back to the old style uniform. I would kind of like to see them do that, but they need to get rid of these uniforms as fast as they can. And like you said, it does feel like they're trying to put the Alec Scheiner era as far behind them as they can get it.
So have you let the fan in you go completely at this point? Do you get to put those things in buckets? Are you completely detached at this point?
You almost can't help but be a little bit detached, just because it's a job. That's kind of how I look at it. Every day when I go to Berea, I'm going there to do a job. When I show up on Sundays at First Energy Stadium, or when I'm traveling to an away game or whatever, I'm going there for work. And so that I think that kind of allows me to take what used to be the fan in me and kind of put it aside, because I'm going to work, and that's great. I mean, that kind of speaks to how cool my job actually is, and I certainly appreciate that. But I just think the fact that this is what I do, this is what my 40 plus hours a week is covering the Browns. Obviously, it's a lot more than that, but you get what I mean. This is just the job I do, so I think the fan in you kind of gets left behind a little bit, just because of that.
Well, and this is something I also asked Zach Jackson about as he's about to embark on getting back into the building. I wonder if people really understand what it's like to cover that team and how it almost kind of detaches you from Cleveland.com because you spend so much time at at Browns headquarters.
Yeah, it's funny because I don't really go into the office anymore. I used to be there almost every day. And so, I had the people I saw every day and my friends at work and things like that. And now I mean, the people I see every day, the people that are most like my coworkers, are guys like Zach, or Scott or Nate, or, of course, Mary Kay and Scott Patsko from our team. We're more coworkers than the people I actually work with at Cleveland.com, because we are around each other every day. We kind of, we experience the same things. We talk about the same things, some crazy press conference or whatever.
You guys are dealing with the same food?
Yeah, exactly. The same food, the same situations. Sometimes we're on the same flights. So the competition is more of your coworker than your actual coworker. It's a really interesting dynamic.
And there was no training for that, right? You just you kind of wake up one day and realize that that's the way it is.
Yeah, exactly. And it's cool because, you do develop friendships, and, you get an opportunity to learn from people from other outlets and make connections. And again, there is some competitiveness there as well. But, somebody does something good, you tell them, because you are kind of rooting for each other. Even though you're competing, you are kind of rooting for each other to do well. And, listen, when somebody writes a good story or writes a good feature or whatever, you appreciate it and you learn from it.
And certainly there's plenty of room in the Browns for everybody to cover, but I just kind of wonder what are the team dynamics of covering that team between you and Mary Kay and even the columnists like Pluto and everybody. I mean, how do you go about making sure you're not stepping all over each other? I mean, obviously, as I said, there's plenty of room for everybody, but I just wonder the practicality of it. Waiting for next year, we use Slack. But I just wonder, how do you guys pull that off?
It's always interesting, especially when you do get into the columnists, because like Terry, obviously he's been around forever, and I have a really good relationship with Terry, so that helps. We'll talk when he's out in Berea. We'll talk about what he's doing. When he's at a game, we'll talk about what he's doing. I usually talk to him for maybe half an hour before every game, just talking and catching up, and we'll kind of touch base on what we want to do after games, and then. With Mary Kay, we've been working together now directly for probably 3 years, and I've known Mary Kay for a while before that. So we have a pretty good relationship. We kind of know, how each other, how we approach each day. And I know what Mary Kay wants to write about going in, and she knows what I want to do, and she'll throw some story ideas at me. So it's really just about kind of making sure when you have an opportunity to catch up with somebody and talk through some things with people that that's what you have to do and know what everyone wants to do, know what everyone's goal is. And again, it's just about communication. If you communicate, you can do that. And with the setup we have, sometimes that can be a little difficult, but when you're all in the same press box, you go up to somebody, you tell them what you're doing and see what they're doing, and you make it work.
Another thing that I've noticed in the coverage over the last, maybe 3-4 years, back to Tom Reed's coverage as well, is the embracing of the video and and now I think it's even moved to Facebook Live. How much of that the new technology ends up kind of shaping the coverage and what you guys want to do, and what are the goals? Is it about trying the new things to see what works, or are there this is exactly what we're going to do?
Some of it is experimenting. Some of it is this is what we're going to do. This is the push we're making. Facebook Live is kind of taking over a lot of things, and that's just because of the power that Facebook has. It's really, as much as people will rip on Facebook and make fun of Facebook, and rightly so, it is an absolute monster. I think for most places, it's right up there as far as where your traffic comes from. Facebook is a big traffic driver for a lot of outlets, and Facebook Live is kind of making a big leap for a lot of outlets as well. So we do a lot with that. The video thing is something that it's just kind of there. We're going to use it. Everybody's still, I think everybody's kind of figuring out how they want to use video, because I'm not sure how much the user or the consumer has embraced video. I know a lot of times for me still, sometimes I'll click on a link off Twitter or something, and if it's a video, maybe I won't watch it because I'm sitting at a desk or I'm sitting somewhere where I can't listen to it. So I think people are still trying to figure that out, but it's become ingrained in kind of what we do every day, and I think that's certainly a good thing. But it also hasn't distracted from what we want to do, and we're all writers at heart. That's what we want to do. So you kind of try and marry the two.
Yeah, and that's always a difficult thing, you know. How much am I supposed to tweet? How much am I supposed to put on? And I'm not speaking for you. I'm speaking for I think all of us. But you know, and I think we've tried all of 2 Facebook Live videos. It just there's no best practices. There's no magic formula. It feels like we're all just like seat of our pants.
Yeah, and I think too with like, I mean, you could spend hours just reading through, you know, best practice blog posts from some random social media person out there. I just always think it's about what kind of works best for you. You know, how do you want to use Twitter, and how do people respond to the way you use Twitter? How do you want to use video? You know, how does it help you what you're working on? It's more about enhancing and kind of figuring out how it works best for you, because I mean, you could go crazy just going through best practices and, you know, the way you should use something and the way people want you to use something. Ultimately, it's got to be, you know, what works best for you, and how does it really what it should be about is how does it work for the people who are consuming what you're doing, and how do they respond to it?
Yeah, I think that's very true. Especially the idea that how people are going to respond to it. That's got to be not that you're looking for a response for everything you do, but you're looking to see once I started thinking about every tweet that I do is who's going to want to read this, and why would they, you know, that it led me to complain a lot less about brands or like companies. You know, you really start to focus, you know, on the personal side. I assume you've pretty much eliminated all personal type tweets off of Twitter at this point.
Not completely. Actually, I've always kind of had a love-hate relationship with Twitter. I think you've kind of been the same way. You know, I think Twitter's really great. I also think Twitter is really awful. But yeah, you know, I've gotten a lot of personal stuff off of there just because I don't know how much people really care. And sometimes I'll see old tweets of mine. I'll be like, what was I thinking tweeting this out? That was really stupid. my Ryan Hollins era tweets.
Those are the best. Don't ever regret Ryan Hollins tweets.
I guess I probably shouldn't, but you know, sometimes I'll look back, and some of it is just, you know, I'm older now. I'm in my mid-30s, so that kind of changes the way you look at it too. But yeah, I keep a lot of personal stuff off Twitter. I'll still put some, you know, I'll post photos of my kids and my dog on Instagram or whatever, but I don't really put that stuff on Twitter anymore.
Yeah. All right. Well, last place I want to go, and maybe I kind of spiked this one for the end, but I wanted to talk a little bit about the owners' meetings and then all the team movement we've had over the last 15, 16 months and the Haslam's voting in favor of the Raiders moving. First of all, what do you make of that? And personally, it really, really made me mad. Like, even though I understand it, it feels like the ultimate disconnect between my former fan feelings of the Browns and what they kind of actually are in reality.
Yeah, I think the Jimmy Haslam or the Haslam's voting for the move is a complicated thing, and I understand why people would say a Browns owner can't do that, right? But at the same time, you've just got to understand it's about money. I mean, these owners are cashing in on these moves. They get money from the relocation fees. You know, they're looking out for their fellow owners as well. It's a really cold way to look at it, but this is a multi-billion-dollar business, and these owners are making money when these teams move, and it stinks. You know, I hate it for fans. Obviously, you know, Oakland Stadium situation was weird, and you know, the whole public money situation is a complete mess, and obviously they're getting a ton of public money to move to Las Vegas, and that drives it as well. I kind of wish that the Browns ownership would take a stand, but listen, the Haslams bought this team. They didn't have this team in 1999. They bought this team, you know, in I forget the year it was. I think it was I'm blanking on the year, 2013. I think
it was 13.
Yeah, I think you're right.
It just feels like 2009.
I know, it
or
doesn't.
99.
Yeah, exactly. And look, he's come in, he's changed the uniforms, they've rebranded this team. I mean, this is a very different owner than what we're used to. I get it. I understand why people would say that a Browns owner should never vote for this team for a team to move, but it's about dollars. That's really what it comes down to.
At some point, do you think NFL owners are going to wake up one day and find out that, they've devalued the entire thing by going for the short-term dollars, though? Because, I mean, the charging another owner $600 million or whatever it is to move and taking your pro rata share of that, like, that's internal money. That's not external money from fans. That's not making more revenue. That's basically stealing from one of your not stealing, but that's reapportioning money from one of your fellow owners.
I think they're taking some risks, honestly. I mean, to take that team out of Oakland and move it to Las Vegas, it's hard for me to imagine them building a really passionate, rabid fan base in Las Vegas. 2 teams in LA. Are they going to build rabid fan bases around 2 teams in Los Angeles? I don't know. But I also think a big part of this is right now it's all about TV money. I mean, that's where the money's coming from for these leagues. You can get into tickets, you can get into all that stuff, but it all comes from TV. And I think we're seeing it in the NBA as well. Players resting didn't become an issue until those big Saturday night games started having players resting, and now ABC and ESPN got upset. And that's where the money comes from for these leagues. And as long as the TV dollars are there, and as long as they have those teams in TV markets, and maybe that whole TV market thing is a little antiquated right now, but it's all about TV money. And I don't think they really care all that much if, a rabid fan base in Oakland loses a team. I think the money is still going to be there for them. But I do think you're right. I do think there is some risk in moving teams away from established fan bases. And also the other issue is, if another city's willing to give public money, the NFL is going to take it.
Well, and if the TV money it's never going to go away completely. I really don't think so. But, if it does falter or if it stops growing at a, astronomical rate like it has been over the last 20, 25 years, whatever it's been, I think they're going to wake up and wish that they had the rabid fans and feel like they need the rabid fans. And, as much as it's interesting that you brought up the NBA, because as much as I hate the fact that they ripped the Sonics out of Seattle, they did at least take it to a place where there were rabid fans. It wasn't like a TV market move.
Yeah, that's true. I hate the fact that they've moved 3 franchises in about 14 months. I do think that is ultimately bad for the league. I think that's a trend that can't continue. And NFL teams move a lot more than in other leagues. You don't see it that often in the NBA. I mean, the last one was Seattle to Oklahoma City, correct? I'm not missing one?
I don't know. I always get confused with New Orleans and Charlotte and whatever happened.
Yeah, you're right. There was that
weird
weird setup too. But it doesn't happen that often in the NBA. And you're not hearing about it in that league. You're not hearing about it as much in baseball either. So there's something about the NFL, and I don't know what it is, but
you know what I think it is, Dan? I think it's the size of the investment in the stadium, because when you build an NBA arena, it's not going to cost as much as Jerry World, but every NFL stadium is, between 60 and 70,000 seats. It's just a bigger capital project.
And it's harder to sell too, I think, to people. I think with whatever you feel about the Q renovations that were approved, that is an arena that gets used a lot throughout the year. Yes. Whereas First Energy Stadium gets used for 10 games. They're going to lose a game this year to London, and then maybe 2 or 3 other events during the year. So I think that can be a harder sell as far as committing public money to those things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I look at, and this isn't just a Haslam problem. Yeah, I take it a little bit personally because we have the history of losing our team in this city. But only one owner voted against the Raiders moving. So it's not, I hate to just, pile it straight on them. And whenever I talk about the Q, I don't want to just pile it on Dan Gilbert, because I think for all, practical purposes, he's the best of a quote unquote bad breed. If you consider professional sports team owners a bad breed because they take public money. It's just, it's a weird time, because I don't feel like we ever talked about this stuff before. And now here we are. These weren't the things that I thought I was going to talk about when we started Waiting for Next Year like 10 years ago and I started contributing.
Yeah, and I think, honestly, the reason we talk about it more, not just, I think social media obviously plays a role in all of it, but I think the reason we talk about it more is people are more aware of the fact that, backing up public money trucks to these owners might not be such a great idea. And I think there is this building sentiment that we've got to stop doing this. Now, nobody has really taken that stand yet. I guess in St. Louis they kind of did. In San Diego. They did. But we're not seeing a ton of people taking that stand, a ton of cities or counties taking that stand against it. But I think one of the reasons we're talking more about it is people are becoming more aware of the fact that, we're having trouble funding schools. Why are we just going to give a bunch of money to billionaire owners? I think there's more awareness to that dynamic.
Yeah, well, it's a weird thing, too, because, if Cleveland takes a stand, but there is some city that doesn't have a team that's willing to step up, or even in Cuyahoga County with our giant corporations, you've seen Eaton kind of leave. They didn't leave Cuyahoga County, but they left Cleveland City proper for the suburbs. And, we even see it kind of in local dynamics. It's if one city is willing to, write off property taxes, it always feels like you need everybody to work together, or you need like one unifying federal rule.
Yeah, you've got to have some kind of collusion there or something.
Collusion, yes, that's
it. and you've got to have a situation where it just doesn't make sense. Look, Oakland was a situation that I think it was always going to be easy for them to leave. Cleveland is different. The Browns aren't going to up and move again. The Cavaliers aren't going to up and move. I think you need a situation like that as well for someone to be willing to stand up and say, no, we're not going to do this. Obviously, it hasn't happened to this point. But if there is a stable situation where it's maybe a little more difficult for a franchise to move, I think maybe that's where it starts. But, I don't know. There is some awareness, there is some discussion, but the actual action sometimes lags far behind.
Well, Dan, you've spent a half hour with us. It's always nice to spend some time talking to you. I hope we don't go as long between episodes this time, but I want to make one request before I get you off the phone here.
Okay.
Is there any plan to get Dan Labbe back on the podcast?
As far as
on the Cleveland.com side?
I don't know. I don't know. I was on, Doug Lesmaurice and Zach Meisel are doing a podcast right now.
And they're doing a nice job.
I made an appearance with them, and then Mary Kay and I have been recording a couple podcasts here and there, and we're going to do some more as the season starts. But yeah, now that I've kind of gone 100% Browns beat, I haven't been, the Pluto podcast, the D-Man podcast. I kind of miss doing them, so I don't know. Maybe we'll have to do a throwback at some point.
You're a very good host, Dan. So don't lose that part of your game.
I'm no Craig Lindahl, though.
Oh, come on. You and D-Man were my favorite. I love you and Pluto. Something about the way that you brought D-Man out was my favorite thing.
well, sometimes I still get phone calls from D-Man every now and again.
Just record him
if he's got a question, and so it'll basically be like 30 seconds of the question he has, and then it'll be 10 minutes of just. It'll basically be 10 minutes of that D-Man podcast. So
that's awesome.
That's kind of how it went.
All right, man. We'll keep up the good work. We'll keep reading. It's been fun to watch you go all the different directions and end up where you ended up, man. It's been a lot of fun.
Well, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
All right. Until next time, everybody. Thanks for listening. It's been the waitingfornextyear.com podcast.